There comes a moment when you look in the mirror and you're just tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, not the kind of tired that a vacation resets, but the kind of tired that sits in your soul, the kind that hides behind smiles. That kind of tired that wears a mask and says, I'm fine, when everything inside you is screaming, I'm not okay. And I want to tell you something bold, something real. Something that the enemy has tried to keep hidden in the shadows of shame inside. You don't have to pretend you're okay anymore. You don't have to keep carrying the weight of what broke you as if healing is something you don't deserve. You don't have to act like you're strong when what you really need is a safe space to fall apart. You don't have to keep showing up with perfection when all God ever asked of you was to show up with honesty. Some of us were taught to survive, not to heal. We were taught to push through, to brush it off, to pray it away but never sit long enough to feel. And so we became performers of strength, actors of joy, fakers of peace. But behind closed doors we are bleeding. Bleeding from the relationships that crushed our worth. Bleeding from the trauma that was never named. Bleeding from the pressure to keep it all together for everybody else while falling apart on the inside. But here's the truth. God never called you to be perfect. He called you to be honest. He never asked you to pretend you're okay. He asked you to come to him just as you are, broken, weary, wounded, afraid, and still his arms remain open. So take off the mask, sis. Take off the I'm fine. Take off the it's nothing. Take off the I got it. Take off the I'm strong when your knees are buckling under the weight of expectations. There's a soft place for you in the presence of God. There's a healing table where you don't have to earn your seat. There's a space where your tears are prayers and your silence is heard and your pain is not dismissed but embraced. You don't have to fake strength to belong here. This is the space where the real you can show up. The version of you that doesn't have it all figured out. The version that's still processing, still asking, still healing. God can handle your truth. He can handle your ugly cry. He can handle your questions. He can handle your silence. You don't have to pretend you're okay anymore. You don't have to keep being the strong one for everyone else. You don't have to smile through the ache. You don't have to be the hero in everyone else's story while feeling like the villain in your own. You are allowed to feel. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say, I'm not okay right now. And you are still worthy of love, grace, of compassion, of healing. This is your permission slip to stop pretending. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is fall apart in front of the one who can put you back together. So breathe. Let the tears fall. Let the walls come down. Healing is not in pretending. It's in revealing. And your healing begins now that you are allowed to stop performing strength and start embracing honesty. That's not something the world told you. That's not something culture rewarded you for. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that strength meant silence. You learned that being dependable meant never depending on anyone else. You learned that if you just kept showing up, smiling, pushing through, then eventually things would fall into place. But what happens when you show up and the pain still follows you? What happens when your smile starts to crack and the weight of everything you're carrying becomes too much to hold? There's something sacred about strength, but there's something dangerous about performing it. Performing strength means you become disconnected from yourself. You start believing that the version of you that gets applause, the version that keeps pushing through, is the only version that deserves love. And so you bury your fears, you mute your emotions. You smile even though you're breaking, and you become so good at pretending that even you forget what's real. You lose sight of your own boundaries. You forget what it feels like to be honest. You silence the voice inside you that's screaming for rest, for compassion, for truth. But God never asked you to perform strength. He asked you to walk in truth. And truth means admitting when you're not okay. Truth means acknowledging the pain instead of minimizing it. It means sitting with your fear instead of trying to dress it up in confidence. It means confessing the moments you don't believe, the moments you feel overwhelmed, the moments you want to quit. Strength isn't about how long you can go without crying. It's not about how much you can carry without complaining. Real strength is rooted in truth. It's rooted in the courage to be seen, not just the polished parts, not just the parts that make others comfortable, but all of you. Somewhere along the way, someone taught you that emotions were dangerous, that vulnerability was weakness, that crying meant you weren't strong enough. So you swallowed your pain, you choked on your tears, you smiled through heartbreak, you got dressed and went to work while falling apart inside. You gave advice to others while ignoring your own cries for help, and you called that strength. But that's not strength, that's survival. And survival doesn't heal you. It just keeps you breathing long enough to hope for something more. Performing strength is exhausting. It's a never-ending cycle of pretending, of overachieving, of trying to be everything for everyone while silently drowning. You can't keep holding your breath and calling it discipline. You can't keep ignoring your own needs and calling it love. You can't keep hiding behind a strong front while your heart is crumbling. Eventually something breaks. Eventually the mask slips. Eventually the truth demands to be heard. And that's not the moment of failure. That's the moment of freedom. Because when you stop performing strength, you start making space for healing. You stop hiding the wounds and start letting God touch the places you never wanted anyone to see. You stop pretending you've got it all together, and you finally allow someone to help carry what you've been holding alone. You stop walking through life armored and start walking through life aware. Aware of your limits, aware of your patterns, aware of your needs. Honesty is the soil where wholeness begins to grow. When you start speaking the truth, first to yourself, then to the people around you, healing begins. And it doesn't mean you collapse and stay there. It means you finally let your knees bend. It means you finally admit, I'm tired, I'm confused, I'm grieving, I'm scared. And those confessions don't make you weak, they make you real. And being real is where God can do the deepest work. So many people are living double lives, not in sin, but in silence. Not in rebellion, but in self-denial. They've convinced everyone they're okay. They've convinced themselves they're fine. But the truth is they haven't been okay for a long time. And pretending only prolongs the pain. Pretending delays the healing. Pretending builds walls that keep out not just people, but the presence that wants to meet you in your truth. You are allowed to stop performing. You are allowed to show up and process. You are allowed to be honest about what you feel without worrying about how it makes others uncomfortable. You are allowed to cry in public. You are allowed to say, I can't do this today. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to admit that being strong has cost you more than it's helped. You are allowed to be soft, to be uncertain, to be healing, to be growing. You don't need a mask to be loved. You don't need a performance to be accepted. You don't need to pretend to be healed in order to be held. God welcomes the broken, not the perfected version you think He requires. But somewhere along the journey, you were made to feel like you had to fix yourself before you could come to Him. Like you had to clean up the mess, hide the cracks, get your emotions under control, put a filter over your soul, and then maybe, just maybe, you'd be worthy enough to be seen. So you waited to feel whole. You waited until the pain was bearable. You waited until you could wrap the trauma in a testimony that sounded more beautiful than it actually was. But God never asked you to wait. He never asked you to show up clean. He never demanded perfection. He invited your presence. We carry this idea that holiness means flawlessness, that faith requires having no questions, that grace is reserved for those who never fall. But when we open our hearts to the truth of God's love, we find a different reality, a Savior who sat with sinners, a shepherd who left the 99 for the one, a healer who touched lepers, a redeemer who chose a cross before we ever chose Him. And that tells me something, that He's not intimidated by your brokenness. He's not waiting for you to become perfect. He's just waiting for you to stop hiding. There's this pressure that builds up inside us when we think we have to be strong for God to use us. When we think that only the polished parts are welcome in His presence. But the truth is, it's the broken places that draw Him in close, the places you're ashamed of. The parts of your story you try to skip over, the memories that still sting, the anger that's still unspoken, the fear you haven't named. Those are the places where grace flows the deepest. You see, God isn't looking for a performance, He's looking for surrender. He doesn't need your rehearsed prayers or your perfect posture. He just wants your heart. The real one, the one that's still bruised from what they said. The one that's still doubting after all this time. The the one that's tired of pretending. Because when you bring that heart to him, he doesn't turn away. He leans in, he comes closer, and he whispers, "This is what I came for." There's a lie that says God only uses the qualified, that he only anoints those who've mastered their emotions and conquered their weaknesses. But if that were true, the Bible would be empty. David was broken, Ruth was broken, Peter was broken, Paul was broken. Yet God wrote his story through people who knew how to bleed. People who failed, people who had regrets, people who wrestled with doubt and fear and shame. And if he welcomed them, then why not you? Some of us have been trying so hard to be the version of ourselves we think God wants, that we've forgotten how to be the version he already loves. We strive, we fix, we filter, we hide, and we call it holiness. But holiness was never about hiding your wounds. It was about letting God touch them. It was about letting him come into the places we're tempted to shut off. The places that still ache. The places that still echo with lies. The places where healing hasn't yet reached. And maybe that's the breakthrough. Realizing that God doesn't just love the future you, the fixed you, the fruitful you. He loves the current you, the in process you. I'm not okay, but I'm still showing up you. That's the one he calls. That's the one he walks with. That's the one he never leaves behind, because his love is not performance-based. It's presence-based, and he's not afraid of the dark rooms in your heart. We think God's love is fragile, like it'll run away if we're too messed up, like he'll withdraw if we confess the truth. But the opposite is true. His love is relentless. It pursues, it surrounds, it breaks chains, it rebuilds from ashes. It looks at your brokenness and sees potential, not punishment. It sees purpose, not disqualification. You are not too broken for God. You are not too messy. You are not too emotional, too wounded, too angry, too doubting. You are not a disappointment. You are not a failure. You are not beyond reach. If anything, your brokenness is your offering. It's the altar where God shows up and says, let me show you what I can do with this. He doesn't need you to pretend. He needs you to trust. To trust that your broken places are safe with him. To trust that your scars are not shameful but sacred. To trust that when you give him the shattered pieces, he won't just tape them back together. He'll make something entirely new. You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to wait until you figured it out. You don't have to earn the love that's already chasing you down. God doesn't need your perfection. He desires your permission. Permission to enter into the mess. Permission to speak into the chaos. Permission to hold you in the places where you've tried to hold yourself together for too long. True healing begins when you stop hiding your pain and start feeling it. We've become so skilled at numbing what hurts that we've convinced ourselves pain doesn't need to be processed. It just needs to be silenced. We stuff it, scroll past it, bury it under busyness, hide it behind achievements, and hope that if we ignore it long enough, it'll eventually disappear. But pain that isn't felt doesn't vanish. It festers, it grows in the shadows, it becomes bitterness, it becomes rage, it becomes shame. And then one day, it shows up in our words, our relationships, our decisions, and how we see God and how we see ourselves. Somewhere you were taught that feeling your pain made you weak. You were taught to be strong, to be composed, to hold it all together, especially when the world was watching. But healing was never meant to be a performance. Healing is messy, it's loud, it's unpredictable, it's raw. It doesn't follow a timeline. It doesn't always make sense to the people around you. And that's okay, because your healing is not for their understanding. It's for your freedom. You can't keep skipping over your feelings and calling it faith. Faith doesn't deny pain. Faith confronts it. Faith says, this hurts, but I'm not running anymore. Faith says that this broke me, but I'm not hiding anymore. Faith invites you to sit in the hard places with God, not alone, not in shame, but in surrender. Because the truth is, God can't heal what you're still pretending isn't there. He can't touch what you won't reveal. He can't free what you still cling to out of fear of falling apart. So many of us have learned to survive pain instead of heal from it. We've learned to function in dysfunction, to laugh while aching, to lead while bleeding, to inspire others while secretly crumbling. And somewhere deep inside, there's this little voice that says, if they really knew what I was carrying, they'd walk away. So we protect ourselves by hiding. But healing doesn't happen in hiding. Healing happens in the light. And light requires vulnerability. It requires that you stop pretending you're okay, that you take the brave step of saying, this happened, it hurt. I don't have all the answers, but I refuse to carry this alone anymore. You are not weak because you feel deeply. You are not broken because the past still stings. You are not faithless because you cry in the middle of worship. Healing doesn't always look like confidence. Sometimes it looks like trembling. Sometimes it looks like taking a deep breath and showing up to the conversation you've been avoiding. Sometimes it looks like sitting in silence with your journal, with your tears, with your truth. And that is not failure. That is freedom in process. There are wounds you can't pray away if you're not willing to face them. There are memories that need to be acknowledged before they can be released. There are things you haven't talked about, not because you're over them, but because you've convinced yourself you don't deserve to heal. But you do. You do deserve to heal. You do deserve to feel the pain so you can release. You do deserve to lay it down, not just spiritually, but emotionally, mentally, physically. Your body remembers what your mouth refuses to say. Your heart stores the grief that your voice has never spoken. And you've been carrying things for years that were never meant to be carried alone. God is not disappointed by your pain. He's not intimidated by your questions. He's not exhausted by your process. He's a healer. And healers don't rush the wound. They tend to it. They sit with it. They make space for it. God doesn't need you to wrap your pain in scripture and call it surrender. He needs you to unwrap it, to bring him the mess, to bring him the real, to bring him the nights you didn't think you'd survive, to bring him the betrayal you haven't forgiven, to bring him the fear you don't admit out loud. That's where healing starts, in the real, in the raw, in the felt. You are not weak for feeling. You are not less spiritual for struggling. You are human, and God created you with emotion, with depth, with a heart that breaks and longs and loves and mourns. And when you begin to feel your pain, instead of hide it, you take the first step toward restoration. You begin to untangle the lies that pain has woven into your identity. Lies like I'm not enough, I'll never be whole, I'm too far gone, this is just who I am now. Feeling the pain doesn't mean you stay in it. It means you finally confront it so it doesn't control you anymore. Some of the greatest breakthroughs don't come through running from the pain. They come from standing in it and saying, I see you, I feel you, but you don't get to define me anymore. Healing is permission. Permission to let go. Permission to cry. Permission to rest. Permission to not be okay today. Because the God who began a good work in you didn't expect you to finish it on your own. He is the author and the finisher, and he meets you exactly where you are, not where you pretend to be. Your vulnerability is not weakness. It's the doorway to transformation. That truth right there shatters so many of the lies you've been carrying. Because for so long, you were told that to be vulnerable was to be exposed, to be soft, to be too much. You were told that showing emotion made you a liability, not an asset. You learned to stay guarded, to keep people at arm's length, to only let them see the highlight reel, the polished version, the carefully curated version of you that wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. But somewhere in the quiet, when the world isn't watching, you started to feel the weight of it, the loneliness, the disconnection, the ache of being known but only in fragments. Vulnerability is the bridge between where you are and who you're becoming. It is the sacred space where masks fall off and truth rises to the surface. It is the unfiltered version of your story, the tears behind your strength, the fear behind your faith. And yet, we spend so much time hiding those parts. We tell ourselves that people can't handle the real us. That if they saw the mess, the insecurity, the anxiety, the broken dreams, they'd walk away. So we keep it in. We fake the confidence. We fake the peace. We fake the trust. And we rob ourselves of the very connection we crave. Transformation doesn't happen in pretending. It doesn't happen when you present a version of yourself that's edited and airbrushed for approval. It happens when you show up raw. When you say, this is what I'm carrying. When you dare to be honest about your fears, your failures, your flaws, and you still believe you're worthy of love and belonging, that is power, that is bravery, that is faith in action. Vulnerability is a risk, there's no denying that. It opens you up to rejection, to misunderstanding, to being judged. But it also opens you up to connection, to healing, to being truly seen and deeply loved. You cannot selectively numb emotions. When you numb the pain, you numb the joy. When you hide your hurt, you also hide your hope. When you guard your heart so tightly that nothing can break in, nothing can grow there either. That's not protection. That's isolation. And isolation isn't where healing lives. Some of us are so afraid of being hurt that we've stopped letting people close. We've built walls instead of boundaries. We've mistaken control for safety. But control never led to intimacy. Control only creates the illusion of peace, not the reality of it. Vulnerability is the soil where trust grows. It's the first step in building relationships that don't just survive, they thrive. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is honest. There's something holy about being able to say, I'm not okay, and I still believe I'm loved. There's something sacred in being able to say, I'm struggling, and I'm not ashamed of it. Because shame thrives in secrecy, but freedom thrives in vulnerability. When you bring what's hidden into the light, it loses its power to haunt you. When you speak the unspoken, you break the silence that's been suffocating your soul. And let's not get it twisted. Vulnerability is not weakness. It takes far more courage to admit your need than to pretend you're self-sufficient. It takes more strength to say, I need help, than to act like you have it all figured out. True strength is found in surrender, not in performance. True strength is found in the heart that keeps opening, even after it's been broken. You don't have to have it all together to be valuable. You don't have to be healed to be held. You don't have to be perfect to be used. God can do more with your honesty than he ever could with your image. He's not impressed by your curated version. He's moved by your truth. The raw, vulnerable, open truth that says, here I am, God. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not pretending anymore. I'm not covering it up with spiritual talk or emotional shutdowns. I'm giving you the real me. When you start to live vulnerably, you give other people permission to do the same. Your honesty becomes a light in their darkness. Your transparency becomes a bridge to their own healing. Vulnerability creates community. It reminds us that we are not alone, that we are all walking through something, that we are all trying to make sense of life, of pain, of purpose. And in that shared space of honesty, transformation begins to take root. You cannot grow while hiding. You cannot be comforted while pretending. You cannot experience deep connection while staying surface level. God wants to meet you in the depths, not the facade. He wants to work through the layers, not the filters. He wants to transform the parts of you that you've been too afraid to reveal. It's okay to cry. It's okay to not know what to say. It's okay to admit that you're still healing. You're still grieving. You're still learning. That doesn't disqualify you. It prepares you. Your vulnerability is not a discredit to your strength, that is the foundation of it. Because when you can stand in your truth and still lift your hands in worship, still keep showing up, still believe there's purpose in the pain, that's when you know transformation has begun. You don't have to carry everyone else while silently losing yourself. Somewhere along the way, you were given the role of the strong one, the one who holds it all together. The one who picks up the pieces for everyone else. The one who listens to everybody's pain, but doesn't have the space to speak of their own. You became the rock, the anchor, the problem solver, the counselor, the comforter. And with time, you forgot that even anchors need grounding, that even rocks can crumble, that even strong ones bleed. You carry the weight of other people's expectations, their crises, their emotional needs, and you do it with grace. But grace doesn't mean absence of exhaustion. Grace doesn't cancel out the weariness that settles into your bones. You became so used to showing up for others that you forgot how to show up for yourself. You became so focused on being what everyone needed that you started to forget who you are when nobody's calling, nobody's demanding. You're still a person beneath the role. You're still a soul, not just a source of strength. There's a silent grief that builds inside the strong ones. A grief that says, I'm always there for them, but who's there for me? It's not selfish to ask that question. It's not wrong to need support. The lie says your worth is in your usefulness. That if you stop giving, stop doing, stop performing, people will leave. But real love doesn't disappear when you draw boundaries. Real love doesn't evaporate when you finally say, I can't do this today. You were never created to carry everyone's burdens on your shoulder. You were created to love, to help, to serve, but not at the expense of your mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Helping others should never cost you you. You are not the savior. That role has already been taken. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to disconnect. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to be unavailable sometimes. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you human. That makes you wise. That makes you whole. Some of us inherited these roles before we even had the maturity to recognize what we were agreeing. You became the emotional caretaker in your family, the fixer in your friend group, the glue in your relationships. But now it's time to reevaluate the cost, because you can love people and still choose peace. You can be supportive and still choose space. You can serve others and still protect your soul. Your healing is not up for negotiation. Your boundaries are not burdens. Your needs matter just as much as theirs. You don't have to apologize for needing rest, for needing silence, for needing to be poured into instead of constantly pouring out. You don't have to feel guilty for sitting still, for taking a break, for walking away from chaos you didn't create. You are not required to destroy yourself to keep others afloat. If you drown in the process of saving everyone, you lose the very light that made you valuable to them in the first place. Let this be the season you stop betraying yourself for the comfort of others. Let this be the moment you give yourself permission to be whole without being needed all the time. Your value does not come from being busy. Your purpose is not measured by how many fires you put out for other people. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say, I love you, but I need to step back. That's not neglect. That's stewardship of your time, your energy, your life. You were not meant to live in a constant state of depletion. You were meant to live filled with joy, filled with peace, filled with strength that doesn't come from overfunctioning, but from being aligned with God. When you make room for yourself, you make room for clarity. You make room for divine guidance. You make room for healing. And in that space, you rediscover the person God created you to be, not just the role you were forced to play. There will always be needs. There will always be people calling. There will always be moments when others want more than you can give. But the ones who truly love you will understand your boundaries. They will respect your humanity. And those who don't, their love was never rooted in truth to begin with. So stop abandoning yourself in the name of being available. Stop saying yes when your spirit is screaming no. Stop carrying what was never yours to carry. You deserve to be held too. You deserve to rest too. You deserve to heal too. This is not the end of your giving heart. It's the beginning of it being healed. It's the beginning of loving others from a place of wholeness instead of depletion. You don't have to carry everyone else while silently losing yourself. You can choose balance. You can choose boundaries. You can choose you. And when you do, you give God room to carry what you were never meant to hold. You give him the space to restore, to refill, and to remind you, your soul was never meant to be last on your list. It was meant to be sacred. So protect it, nurture it, and allow yourself to finally breathe again.